Sansare Tate, author of Little X. In your book, you talk about your life as a young girl growing up in the Nation of Islam. Let me begin by first asking you to describe your family's life prior to joining the Nation.
Prior to joining the Nation of Islam, my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, were in a holiness church. In fact, my paternal great-grandfather was one of the founders of the Church of Bethlehem in a holiness church here in the district. And he raised my grandmother and his other 13 children in this church. My grandmother became disillusioned with the mainstream black church, which the holiness church was a part of. And she and her husband later joined the Nation of Islam once they started their family. Fard Muhammad, so the story goes, was the original founder of the Nation of Islam back in 1930. And in the book, I touch on Fard Muhammad starting the Nation of Islam in Detroit, in the slums of Detroit, in the 1930s during the Depression, and then Elijah Muhammad took over a few years later. And what appealed to them was that for the first time in their life, someone was telling them that they too were created in the image of God. They had never heard that, never considered that black folks were created in the image of God. And so that's what attracted them initially to the Nation of Islam. So my grandmother describes what they were getting as reverse psychology, whereas they had been told they were the scum of the earth, they were the evil ones. Along comes Elijah Muhammad preaching the opposite. And it was, I guess it was a sort of a way for them to heal psychologically from the damages of racism. They have very intense practices to achieve unity and solidarity. I think people get into it for the unity and solidarity that they didn't feel a part of out in mainstream society. They impress upon the individual a sense of responsibility to the group. You have to work for the group. I know back when my father was a child, the Nation of Islam required that the brothers sell a certain number of newspapers or pay out of their pockets because they were trying to build a nation. And because blacks did not feel like they were appreciated in mainstream society, the idea of building their own nation, an all-black nation, appealed to many, and brothers worked hard. Sisters worked hard too, because when the brothers were out working for no money, sometimes at these restaurants, working very long hours just to build this all-black nation that they believed in at the time, the sisters were home and they had to finagle with the meager funds that they had. But most of us really did not want to be confined to the house. Everybody was committed to the idea of this sort of utopia society, which in theory is good, but in practicality is another story. As you know, Muslim women are taught to cover from head to toe. So you don't want to show your curves because it might incite some man to view you as a sexual object. So we wore long skirts and a long loose-fitting top and a head covering in the interest of modesty. But by the time I was 13, I argued with my mother that that my Muslim dress was not modest because it distinguished me. And to that point, I thought it called more attention to myself. And that was the opposite effect of what the Muslim dress was supposed to do. What else can I say about the dress? Well, the dress supposedly was in the interest of modesty. But I have problems with that because I think that we were born with beautiful curves, and because men may lust over that, I don't think the burden of covering up should be on the women. Men should have to put that lust in check. Not just because of the dress, but because of the role of the Muslim women, the Muslim woman. When I was coming along in the 70s, women were making strides to break the barriers of the traditional role of the woman. The women wanted to go out of the house and wanted to be respected beyond their domestic roles. But Muslim women, I know as a Muslim girl, I was taught that being a mother and a wife is the most important job a woman could have. I do believe those are important jobs, but I don't think they're the only jobs a woman can have. And I don't think it's necessarily the woman's job. I think it's convenient to have roles for everyone in the family. But we were trying to, I guess, conform to these roles while other women outside of our religion were breaking down barriers. When my family was in the nation, everyone tried to conform to a role. My grandmother she did conform to her role as a Muslim woman, staying in the home, nurturing her family. And my grandfather was the provider, and he took care of the family. My mother tried, but she was just not a woman. She just had too much energy to confine in the house. There was so much disillusionment coming out of the nation. I think that's where the real damage was done, because my family had basically withdrawn from mainstream society into this all-black society, thinking that it would be a better way of life. Indeed, we learned some lessons to help on a daily basis, practical lessons about nutrition and practical things. The women learn to sew, learn to plan nutritious meals, learn to sit down with the children for homework. But the broader ideas that we learned that, white is good, white is bad and black is good, they're evil, we're gods. And then to come to understand that that's not so. My mother was chastised for her individuality. You were supposed to wear certain uniforms in certain colors, and if you did not, you were escorted to the back of the seating section. The Nation of Islam was about conforming to the Nation of Islam's policies and practices, because I guess in that unity, if you have a block of people doing the same thing, then there's power in that. So there was no room for individuality. We were taught that the Caucasian race was the evil, wicked race. And my problem with that is what happened with my father's generation when they grew up in this all-black Nation of Islam that everybody believed in, because if the white man is the devil, then we can build our all-black nation and we won't have these same evils. But to grow up and then find out that evil really has no color line, that greed has no color line, that corruption has no color line, because these are human ills. But to have packaged everything in terms of black and white in order to fight what previous generations had been taught, I guess I know it had, at some point you have to reverse the damage, but I don't think there must be another way to do it. I had been away from the Nation of Islam for a few years, and as an Orthodox Muslim, I was now being taught that that God loves us all, and that there are Caucasian Muslims as well as, Muslims of every race and every color. So by the time I was meeting white people, I no longer believed that they were all evil. That in this all-black society, you can still feel quite disenfranchised. You can still feel ostracized. You can still feel in our all-black society, you had your rank and file here and your leaders there with double standards. You had your corruption. You had the same dynamics that you have in any group of people. You had it in the Nation of Islam. My family didn't understand that going in. My mother left the nation about a year before Elijah Muhammad died. After Elijah Muhammad passed, his son took the organization toward Orthodox Islam, and most of my family followed him toward Orthodox Islam, which he told us that much of what his father had taught us was plain old not true. The philosophies, the theology that he had created, his son explained the intent behind it. But now to bring people, because we had practiced these religious tenets with such intensity, now to find out that it was, basically made up. For a lot of the people, it was a difficult transition.